sea had always been a part of his life. To 56-year-old Thomas Parker, the rhythm of the waves was a familiar comfort, just like the wind that tugged at his weathered cap. For over 30 years, he had fished along the craggy cliffs of the Oregon coast, a place known for its unpredictable waters and secrets buried beneath the surface. On an ordinary Tuesday morning, Thomas set out in his modest boat, expecting another calm day of fishing. But as he navigated closer to the rocks, something unusual caught his eye, something half submerged in the water. It was a box, covered in layers of seaweed, as if the ocean itself had decided to hide it. His gut told him to investigate further. The old fisherman's instincts were never wrong. When he finally pried open the box, what he found inside didn't belong to this world, or any world he knew. Would you have dared to open it? Don't forget to subscribe to hear more of these strange and mysterious tales. Thomas Parker had been fishing these waters since he was a boy. The years had taught him the rhythms of the sea, how it calmed one moment and how it could turn on you the next. The waters off the Oregon coast were a mystery to many, filled with jagged rocks, shifting currents, and hidden coves. Fishermen whispered of strange occurrences, of objects that appeared out of nowhere, of things lost in time that the ocean seemed to reclaim. Thomas had always brushed these stories off, thinking them to be nothing more than exaggerations. But that morning, as he steered his boat along the rocky shoreline, something didn't feel right. He could sense it in the air, the sharp, salty tang carried by the wind. It was as if the ocean itself was watching him. He was about to pull up his nets when he saw it. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a patch of seaweed drifting lazily in the water. But as the boat approached, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. There was something buried beneath the seaweed, something rectangular. The shape was too uniform to be natural. It was as if someone had placed it there deliberately. His heart skipped a beat, an odd mixture of curiosity and unease rising in his chest. Thomas slowed the boat, his hands gripping the wheel with an odd tension. He circled the area, trying to get a better look. The closer he got, the more it became clear. The object wasn't just a random piece of debris. It was a box, large and weathered, its surface hidden beneath layers of slimy seaweed. It was the kind of thing he'd never seen before. Certainly not something that would wash up on the Oregon coast. There was no telling how long it had been there, but it seemed out of place. He cut the engine and grabbed the boat's oar, slowly maneuvering the craft closer to the mysterious object. His experienced hands felt the rough wood of the oar as he gently nudged the box, now visible above the waterline. It floated oddly, as though it were weighed down on one side. There was a faint metallic glint where the sun reflected off a small metal clasp, which had caught his attention. It was almost as if the box was waiting for him. As he reached out to grab it, his instincts screamed at him, telling him that there was something important, something beyond the ordinary, about this find. He wasn't one for superstition, but Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled upon something far more significant than he realized. The ocean had a way of keeping secrets, and whatever this box was, it had kept its secrets hidden for a long time. With careful hands, he tugged it closer, using the rope to secure the box to the side of the boat. The seaweed clung to it like a shroud, almost as if trying to protect whatever lay inside. He hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment. It was just a box, right? But why did it feel like the air around him had shifted, as though the world had become still, waiting? Thomas paused, his hand on the box. He looked out at the open water, the waves gently lapping at his boat. His thoughts raced. This wasn't like anything he'd ever encountered on his countless trips out here. For a moment, doubt gnawed at him. Should he open it? Was it safe? He'd heard the stories, the strange disappearances, the unsolved mysteries of objects that surfaced and disappeared again. But he had lived his life based on his gut, his instincts. And right now, his gut told him to open it. His fingers found the metal clasp, rusted with age, and carefully pried it open. The hinges creaked in protest, but eventually the lid gave way. As it opened, a rush of cold, stale air burst out, mingling with the salty breeze. The box revealed its contents, an assortment of old, tattered papers, bound together with a fraying string. At the top, there was a strange, ancient-looking map that seemed to be drawn in some kind of faded ink. The parchment had aged so much that it crumbled at the edges, as if it might fall apart at the slightest touch. But what really caught his eye was the object lying beneath the map. It was small and cylindrical, covered in a strange, oily substance that shimmered under the sun's rays. His breath caught in his throat. It didn't look like anything he had ever seen. It wasn't man-made, or at least, not in the way he understood. The cylindrical object was covered in intricate carvings, symbols he couldn't recognize, patterns that twisted and turned as though they held a story of their own. The material was unfamiliar too, shiny, almost metallic, but at the same time, soft to the touch, like something from another time, or another world. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't just an ordinary find. This was something far beyond his understanding. He didn't know what it was, but it felt dangerous. His fingers hovered over the object, unsure whether to touch it or leave it where it was. But something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a strange compulsion, urged him to pick it up. As his hand wrapped around the object, the world seemed to shift slightly. A chill ran down his spine, and his breath caught. The moment his fingers made contact, a strange vibration hummed beneath his skin, faint at first, but growing stronger the longer he held it. It was as though the object itself was alive, its energy pulsing through him. He quickly pulled his hand away, the object slipping from his grasp and rolling back into the box. His heart raced as the strange sensation slowly faded. He sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. The sea was still and quiet, but his thoughts were anything but calm. He stared at the box, unsure of what to do next. Should he take it to the authorities? Should he leave it here, where it came from? His mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw the name of his old friend, Dave, flashing on the screen. Dave had been his fishing partner for years, someone he trusted. Thomas hit the call button, his voice low as he spoke. "Dave, you're not going to believe this." Dave's voice crackled on the other end of the line, sharp and awake, as if he'd been waiting for this call. "Tom, what's going on? You sound strange." "I found something," Thomas replied, his voice barely above a whisper, still processing everything that had just happened. Something in the water. Something weird. A brief pause followed, filled with the sound of wind rustling through the boat's rigging. "Weird? What do you mean, weird?" Dave's voice held a tone of skepticism, but with a hint of curiosity. Thomas wasn't the type to call with a false alarm. "I don't know how to explain it." Thomas hesitated. "It's a box, covered in seaweed like it's been there for ages. Inside, there's something metal, strange. It feels wrong, Dave. I swear to God." Dave let out a low chuckle, though it was tinged with concern. "All right, calm down. What are you going to do about it?" "I'm thinking of taking it in, but I need your help. You're the one with the contacts in the Coast Guard, right?" Another pause, this time longer. "Yeah, I know some people. I'll get someone out there to check it out, but you need to stay put, all right? Don't do anything stupid." Thomas exhaled, though he could still feel the pulse of adrenaline rushing through his veins. "I'll be here. Just hurry." He hung up and stared at the box again. For a brief moment, the world around him felt frozen in time. The sea was eerily still, and even the seagulls seemed to be holding their breath. It wasn't like any other moment he had experienced on the water. Something was different. Something in the air felt charged. He reached down again, but before he could touch the object, his phone buzzed once more. It was a text message from Dave. "Don't touch anything until help arrives." But Thomas had already done it. The object was calling to him, a pull he couldn't ignore. It was as if it was meant for him, and that thought both excited and terrified him. A half hour passed before the distant sound of a boat engine hummed through the quiet. Thomas turned to see a smaller Coast Guard vessel making its way toward him. His stomach twisted as he watched the boat draw nearer, the officers aboard looking curiously at his boat. Thomas waved them over and stood up, his legs stiff from sitting too long in one position. The Coast Guard boat pulled up alongside him. A tall man with a weathered face and dark sunglasses called out to him. "You Thomas Parker?" the officer asked, squinting at him through the bright morning sun. "That's me," Thomas said, feeling the weight of his discovery suddenly more real now that someone else was here. The officer surveyed the scene, then looked at the strange box floating on the side of his boat. "What have you got there?" the officer asked, voice low and cautious. Thomas motioned to the box. "Found it just off the rocks. It's not something I've seen before." The officer stepped closer, inspecting the object from a distance. His expression flickered for a moment. Surprise, maybe even a little unease. And then he nodded. "All right, let's take a closer look." He reached into his bag and pulled out a pair of gloves. "You mind if I take a look?" Thomas hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead, but be careful. I don't know what it is, but I swear there's something off about it." The officer knelt beside the box, carefully peeling back the seaweed with gloved hands. As he did, Thomas noticed the way his fingers trembled slightly as he uncovered the object. The officer paused, staring down at the object for a moment, before slowly lifting it from the water. He didn't say anything, just stared at it with a mixture of confusion and caution. "Never seen anything like it," the officer muttered, carefully setting the object on the deck of Thomas's boat. "You said you found this in the water?" "Yeah, right over there." Thomas pointed out to the spot where the box had been. It doesn't make sense." "How did it get there?" The officer didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out his radio and spoke into it in a low, steady voice, too quiet for Thomas to make out the words. After a moment, he turned back to Thomas. "We're going to need to take this back to base," the officer said. "There's no telling what this could be. I've never seen anything like this in my entire career." Thomas felt his gut tighten. His earlier instincts had told him to open it, to explore. But now, as the officer called for backup, something in him screamed that they were only scratching the surface of something much bigger. As the officer carefully secured the box and made arrangements for the Coast Guard to transport it back to the mainland, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. What had he stumbled upon? What kind of secrets lay within that box? And why had it been hidden for so long, only to surface now? The officer's voice broke through his thoughts. "We're heading back. You want to follow us?" Thomas nodded absently, still trying to process the enormity of the situation. He climbed into his boat and started the engine, following the Coast Guard vessel back toward the shore. The journey felt slower than usual, as if the world was holding its breath. The sea, once so familiar and comforting, now felt alien and unpredictable. As they neared the shore, Thomas couldn't help but glance back at the object on the deck of the Coast Guard boat. The box seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, as if it were alive, or perhaps waiting for someone to figure out what it truly was. Thomas's mind raced. The Coast Guard would handle it. They would probably do their tests and investigations. But deep down, he knew that whatever it was, this discovery would be something that no one could easily explain away. What did the box contain? Why had it been hidden in the depths of the ocean for so long? And who, if anyone, knew the truth about it? What would you have done if you were in Thomas's shoes? Would you have opened the box, or would you have waited for help? Make sure to hit the like button if you're enjoying this mystery, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what you think is inside that box. Could it be a forgotten artifact, a long-lost treasure, or something far darker? We'll find out soon. And don't forget, your theories are what make these stories even more fun. Share them in the comments. The boat ride back to shore was far more unsettling than Thomas had anticipated. The calm waves seemed to roll over the surface, hiding something deeper beneath. As they approached the harbor, the air grew thicker, heavier with anticipation. Thomas could see the Coast Guard officers exchanging looks, glances filled with an unspoken concern. Even the officers who seemed confident at first were now acting with caution. The object had unsettled them more than they were willing to admit. Once they docked, the officer who had first examined the box gave Thomas a nod. "Stay here. We'll get this taken care of." Thomas climbed out of his boat and onto the dock, the familiar scent of salt water mingling with the sharp tang of engine oil. The Coast Guard began their work, carefully transporting the box toward a waiting van, ready to be driven to the nearest facility for further investigation. The officer who had been in charge of the discovery was now on his radio again, speaking rapidly, trying to coordinate with headquarters. His voice, though professional, trembled just slightly. "Tom, you should head home for now. I'll call you if we need you for anything else," the officer said, his eyes focused on the team unloading the box. Thomas didn't move immediately. He couldn't. Something about the way the officers acted now was different than before, almost as though they had already decided that whatever this object was, it was beyond their ability to handle. "No, I'm coming with you," Thomas said, his voice firm. He wasn't going to just let them handle it without knowing more. Not after what he had felt when he touched that object. Something was telling him that the answers he was looking for weren't going to come easily. In fact, he feared that the deeper he dug, the more dangerous it would get. The officer gave him a long look, and for a moment, Thomas thought the man might argue with him. But then, with a resigned sigh, the officer nodded. "All right, you can come, but don't get in the way. This could turn into something much bigger than we thought." Thomas followed the officers in the van down a narrow road that wound through the coastal town, finally arriving at a small, secure facility tucked behind a barbed wire fence. The facility was used for a variety of purposes, including equipment storage and routine training, but Thomas could tell that today, the place had become something else, something much more secretive. A couple of uniformed men were already waiting outside the facility's steel doors, and they greeted the arriving team with silent nods. Inside, the lights were bright, harsh against the thick concrete walls. A large metal table stood at the center of the room, and Thomas couldn't help but notice the sterile, clinical atmosphere. The object was placed there as the officers moved quickly, setting up equipment to examine it. "Step back, Parker," the officer in charge told him as he positioned himself by the table. Thomas hesitated for a moment, but then took a few steps back, his eyes fixed on the box. The feeling of dread that had washed over him earlier in the boat returned in full force. This wasn't just a curious discovery. It was something that held potential for danger. He could sense it in the air. The officers surrounded the box, speaking in low tones, discussing their next steps. One of the men, a technician by the looks of it, had already started inspecting the object more closely. He was using a small tool, tapping the object gently, trying to detect any irregularities or hidden compartments. A few minutes passed in tense silence as they worked, their eyes flicking between the object and the instruments they had set up. Suddenly, the technician stopped and looked up, a curious expression crossing his face. "This doesn't make sense. The material, it's not consistent with anything we know." The officer in charge leaned forward. "What do you mean?" The technician wiped his hands on a cloth and held up a small tool with a fine point, then carefully pointed it at the box. "This metal, I've never seen anything like it. It's almost like a composite material, but, well, it's like it was made to hide its true properties. It doesn't respond to regular tests. We should run it through a spectrum analyzer." Thomas stood there, heart racing. Every word the technician spoke only seemed to deepen the mystery. Whatever this object was, it wasn't just unusual, it was unnatural, and that was the problem. The more they looked, the more questions arose, and the fewer answers they had. Another officer, a senior member of the team, walked over and nodded toward the object. "Keep going. Don't leave any stone unturned." He turned to Thomas and gave him a quick, assessing look. "This box came from the water, right? You didn't bring it in from somewhere else?" "Yeah, I swear. I found it floating just off the rocks, wrapped in seaweed. Nothing in the area looked out of place." The officer's brow furrowed. "That's what doesn't make sense. Whatever this is, it doesn't belong here, or anywhere for that matter." Thomas could feel a chill creep up his spine. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this thing didn't come from the ocean," the officer said, voice low. "At least not in the way we think. I'll tell you something else. This isn't the first time we've had strange objects show up out here, but this is different. It's not just a treasure chest or some old wreckage. Whoever made this, whoever put this here, they didn't want it to be found." The room fell silent. For the first time, Thomas felt the weight of the situation settle over him like a heavy fog. This wasn't just an accidental discovery. Someone had intentionally hidden this box, and for reasons that no one here could yet understand, they had wanted it to stay hidden for as long as possible. The technician began running more tests, carefully scanning the object for anything that could give a clue as to its origins. The hum of the machines filled the room as the officers stood in tense formation, exchanging whispers. Minutes turned to hours. Thomas didn't move, though he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. This box, whatever it was, had just scratched the surface of something far more complex and far more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. Then the technician spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've got something. A signal. Coming from inside." Thomas felt his heart drop. "A signal?" he asked, his voice shaking. The technician nodded. "It's faint, but it's there. Something electronic. Something transmitting." The officer in charge leaned in, his expression darkening. "Get the lab techs on this now." But in that moment, Thomas knew something crucial had just shifted. Whatever had been locked away inside that box was waking up, and with it, the answer to a question he wasn't sure he wanted to know. What was inside? And more importantly, who had put it there? Thomas stood in the sterile room, a heavy weight on his chest. The technician's revelation had hit him like a slap to the face. There was something inside the box, something that was actively sending a signal. A signal. That meant this object wasn't just a relic of some forgotten era or a piece of random junk tossed into the ocean. No, it was something far more intentional. The more he thought about it, the more the whole situation seemed to spiral into a dangerous unknown. As the technician worked diligently, adjusting dials and typing commands into the system, Thomas's mind raced. Who would send a signal from something like that? Was it a person, a group, a secret organization? And what did they want with the box? Was it a form of communication? And if so, who were they trying to reach? His gaze shifted to the officers who were now quietly huddling near the back of the room, speaking in hushed tones. They had gone from cautious curiosity to clear concern. This was no longer a case of a simple find for the authorities. This was something far more serious, something they were scrambling to control, even though no one knew exactly what they were dealing with. Anything? The officer in charge walked toward the technician, his voice low but urgent. The technician wiped his forehead, his brow furrowed. I've been able to isolate the signal. It's encrypted, but I can hear something. A faint rhythmic pattern. It's almost like it's trying to make contact. It's definitely not something we should ignore. But the frequency, it's unlike anything I've ever encountered. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. A signal. But from where? Why? And why now? The officer looked at Thomas, his eyes narrowed. What else did you find inside this box, Parker? There has to be more. Thomas swallowed hard. He had only seen the map and that strange cylindrical object, the one that had sent a pulse through his skin when he touched it. But that wasn't enough. There was something they weren't telling him. The way the officer had reacted, the way they had isolated the signal. Something wasn't adding up. I didn't get a chance to look through everything carefully, Thomas said slowly. But there's a map, and there's that. He hesitated, unsure of how to describe the object. It's some kind of metallic cylinder, covered in markings I couldn't recognize. It's not like anything I've seen. The officer glanced over at the technician, who nodded grimly. It's not just any map either. The material. It's made from something organic, yet it's clearly centuries old. It doesn't match any known historical or maritime charts. If anything, it looks alien. Alien. Thomas recoiled at the word. It was a ridiculous thought. He had to be imagining things. But the more he thought about the object, the signal, and the mysterious markings, the more he wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was something to it. We need to take this to the next level, the officer said, his voice now laced with urgency. He turned to the technician again. Get everything you've got. We need to know more about this signal. What's it trying to say? The technician nodded quickly, tapping away at his computer, his fingers moving over the keys with an intensity that matched the growing tension in the room. The beeping of his equipment seemed louder now, almost frantic. And then, as if in answer to the technician's question, the signal suddenly grew stronger. A rhythmic thumping noise echoed in the room, the frequency increasing with every passing second, pulsing in a way that almost seemed deliberate. Thomas's pulse quickened. The hum of the machine grew louder. It felt like the room was closing in on him. The walls seemed to press together as he watched the signal intensify on the screen. What was happening? What was this thing trying to communicate? Guys, look at this, the technician said, his voice rising in both astonishment and concern. On his screen, the signal took a sharp turn. It was no longer just a simple rhythm. Now it was forming a recognizable pattern, one that sent a chill through Thomas's body. The technician's face blanched. This is a language of some kind. A language. Thomas felt his legs go weak, and for a second, he had to brace himself against the metal table. His mind raced. A language? How could that be? Who had created it? Why? And more importantly, what did it mean? The officer stepped closer, his expression hardening. What do you mean, a language? The technician's fingers flew across the keyboard, trying to decode the transmission. The beeping slowed for a moment, and then the computer emitted a sharp tone that drew everyone's attention. It's almost like a message, the technician murmured, his eyes wide with disbelief. I think it's a... He paused, unsure. A warning? The word hung in the air like a cloud of cold, heavy mist. Thomas swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in his throat. A warning? From who? From where? Was this just the tip of an iceberg? Something far bigger, far darker than anyone had anticipated. "Keep going," the officer barked. "Don't stop now. We need to know everything." The technician adjusted his glasses and, with a shaking hand, clicked a few more buttons. The pattern began to solidify, each click of the keyboard unraveling more of the message. As the words on the screen began to form, the room fell silent. Thomas leaned forward, his breath shallow. The message was in a strange foreign language, but there were recognizable symbols, almost like a form of pictographs, mixed with numbers. The pattern began to translate slowly, pixel by pixel, until they could make out the message. "Do not open. The world is not ready." The words hit like a punch to the gut. The officer recoiled, a look of sheer disbelief crossing his face. What the hell does that mean? Thomas's mind whirled. A warning? Who was this from? And why was it so urgent? This was no coincidence. This wasn't just some piece of old wreckage or a forgotten artifact. This was something far more complex and far more dangerous. The room grew tense as everyone digested the message. The air felt heavy with unspoken questions. And then, as if the very ground beneath them was shifting, the technician looked up with an expression that could only be described as horror. "Wait," he said, voice quivering. "There's more." Everyone froze. "What do you mean more?" the officer demanded. The technician looked at the screen again, his face paling. "There's another part to the message. It's not finished. The last part, it's encrypted, but it's..." He gulped. "It's saying something about coming back." "Coming back?" Thomas repeated, his voice low, almost drowned out by the growing sense of dread. The technician nodded, still staring at the screen. "Yeah, something about returning to the source. I can't decrypt it all, but it's clear this wasn't meant to be found. Not now." "Who the hell would leave a message like that?" one of the other officers muttered under his breath. "And why?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. And yet, there was no doubt in anyone's mind. This was bigger than any of them had expected. This wasn't just an abandoned artifact. It was a message. And the warning wasn't just for Thomas. It was for everyone. But from whom? And what exactly was meant by coming back? What did this all mean? Was there more to the box than anyone had anticipated? Let us know your thoughts. What do you think is inside this box? Is it a warning from the past? Or something much darker? Maybe even from the future? Could it be a forgotten piece of history? Or a harbinger of something to come? If you're enjoying the mystery, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe for more eerie discoveries like this, and drop your theories in the comments below. What do you think is really going on here? And why is the world not ready for whatever this box holds? The tension in. The room was suffocating as the last fragment of the message echoed in Thomas's mind. Coming back to the source. The words clung to him, a shiver running down his spine. He stood frozen, staring at the technician's screen, the ominous words flickering in front of him like a warning he couldn't escape. What did it mean? Coming back to the source? Was it a place? A person? A thing? The officer in charge stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "I don't care what it takes. We need to know who sent this, and why. This isn't something we can let slip through our fingers." Thomas nodded, his voice shaky as he responded. "But who are we dealing with here? This isn't just some random find. This is planned. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." The technician took a deep breath, his hands still trembling as he typed furiously at the keyboard. The message was clear now, but the encrypted part, the part about the source, remained a mystery. But it was clear enough to all of them. Someone had gone through great lengths to hide this object, and now it was stirring up something they were not prepared for. "Do you have any idea what the source is?" the officer asked, his voice urgent. The technician shook his head. "Not yet, but I'm digging deeper. If we can crack this, we might get a clearer picture of what's really going on here." Suddenly, the radio on the officer's belt crackled to life, breaking the tense silence. The officer grabbed it immediately, his voice sharp as he spoke into it. "What is it?" There was a brief exchange of words on the other end, and then the officer's face drained of color. He turned back to the team, his expression grim. That was the higher-ups. "They're sending in a full investigative team. They've already warned us to be cautious. This isn't just a local matter anymore. It's national." Thomas's heart skipped a beat. "National? What do you mean?" The officer didn't answer directly. Instead, he turned back to the technician. "Keep working. Get whatever you can from that signal. We don't have much time." The room grew even more frantic as the officers scrambled to prepare for the arrival of the national team. But Thomas couldn't focus on the action around him. His mind kept replaying the message, coming back to the source. What did it mean? Was it a clue? A warning? Or was it something far darker, something that would unravel everything they thought they knew? Hours passed, and the situation only grew more intense. The higher-ups had sent in additional experts, scientists, cryptographers, even military personnel, who began to analyze the box, the signal, and the contents with an obsessive urgency. But still, there were no concrete answers. And then, just when it seemed like the mystery might be buried under layers of government secrecy, something happened. A breakthrough. The technician, exhausted and with bleary eyes, looked up from his computer screen. His hands were shaking as he pointed to the newly decrypted message. "There's something else hidden in the signal," he said, his voice trembling. "It's not just a warning. It's a map, a set of coordinates, and they lead to a location." The officer stepped forward, his face a mix of disbelief and fear. "Where? Where does it lead?" The technician typed furiously, pulling up the coordinates on the map. A pin dropped onto the screen, marking a location deep in the Pacific Ocean. It was hundreds of miles off any known shipping routes, tucked away in a part of the ocean that was rarely explored. "Where is that?" Thomas asked, his voice barely audible. The technician's finger hovered over the screen. "It's a place no one's ever been. Uncharted waters, deep sea trenches." Thomas felt a pit grow in his stomach. This was no ordinary discovery. Whoever had placed that box in the ocean, whoever had left the message, had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure it stayed hidden. And now, it was clear. They weren't just hiding the box. They were hiding something far more important. The officer turned to his team, his voice shaking with uncertainty. "We're going to need more resources. A deep-sea expedition. But we have to be careful. Whatever is down there, we don't know if it's ready for us to find." Thomas watched as the officer's team began to make calls, coordinating with other agencies. The room was filled with hurried voices, the air thick with the tension of a discovery that threatened to change everything. And in the midst of it all, Thomas was left to wonder, what would they find if they followed the coordinates? Would they uncover a buried secret from the past? Or was this the beginning of something far larger, something that could shift the very fabric of reality? As the room buzzed with activity, Thomas took a step back, looking out the window at the stormy skies. His mind raced, but there was only one thing he knew for certain. The mystery was far from over. The signal, the warning, the uncharted location, everything pointed to one undeniable truth. The world wasn't ready for what was coming, and neither was he. But what about you? Would you dare to follow the coordinates? Would you uncover the truth, no matter the cost? The officers and experts in the room might have had their doubts, but one thing was clear. They were about to embark on an expedition that would uncover more than just the truth behind the box. They would unlock the door to an entirely new mystery, one that could change everything. Now it's your turn. What do you think lies at the coordinates? Could it be an ancient secret, a lost city, or something more sinister? Make sure to hit that like button if you're intrigued, subscribe for more mysterious discoveries, and comment below with your theories. What do you think is really going on here? What does coming back to the source mean? And what's waiting in the depths of the ocean? Don't forget to turn on notifications so you'll be the first to know when we dive deeper into this mystery. You won't want to miss what's coming next. The truth is out there, and it's waiting for someone to find it.